Yeah, I mean, I think professionalism is a big part of it because once I've started, a lot of people started that were really good writers, but they weren't very professional. And another thing is creating something that's not like somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, your style's not like anybody else. I mean, I know it immediately when I see it, and of course, I bragged on you, and I don't want to overdo that because I really think the money you gave me is starting to run out, man. I think as a writer, I didn't try to say, "Am I the next Robert E. Howard?"
Yeah.
I didn't want to be the next Robert E. Howard. I wanted to be Joe Lansdale. I didn't want to sell, I didn't want to sell mysteries. I didn't want to sell horror. I wanted to sell me. And it seems to me that as an artist, that even if you're adapting, and the writing, of course, I think you have your own style there too, but we're talking primarily about your art. But in the art, I think that what you did is you created your own, to me, it's a very gritty, realistic, sometimes hyper-realistic style that it's just so unique. I mean, there are like a few artists I might say, well, it's a little reminiscent of that, a little, but not much. It's you've created something so that when people want you, they're going to get Tim Truman. They're not going to get the guy that's trying to draw like fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's been one of the major reasons that you've continued to work and that
With First Comics,
question.
the people at First Comics loved my work because they had enjoyed old Undergrounds. That was my major influence, was Underground comics. And but the people at DC, I got through the grapevine that people like DC and Marvel that would look at my work that, oh, we don't like this guy because it looks too much like Undergrounds, And so later I started working with them after I'd established myself, working with DC and Marvel. But there was just something. Part of it's not really having. Drawing is hard for me. I'm fast, but I'm my own worst critic, and it's just a struggle for me. I always have to struggle with the work, and I'm never satisfied with it. 90% of the stuff that I've done, I just don't really like to look at it. But in one way, I think it's kind of an advantage because it keeps me wanting to get better, to kind of arrive at where I want to be.
Right.
But and I don't know where the stylisms came from. Somebody said, in fact, Walt Simonson, famous comic book artist, he has this. I was reading an interview with him, and he told me, or he said in the interview, that the definition of someone's style is the summation of their mistakes. That's what makes your style. I was like, holy cow, that's absolutely correct. That's what makes us all different,
Yeah, it's like when I was writing, people said, what I really like is how you bring East Texas to it. And I thought, well, I'm just ignorant. I don't know any other thing other than but one of the things, too, is that when you worked on your own comics and sort of like self-publishing stuff, I noticed that didn't always have a happy result with you. It's because you didn't stay with doing that. You ended up going back to traditional comics. What was it just that you just wore out with the business aspect of it?
No.
Or was it, tell me something about that.
Well,
I've always been a little curious about that.
Whenever I do creator-owned projects, I see them as novels.
Okay.
And they have a beginning and a middle and an end. And even on some of the commercial things, like I did this thing called Hawk World with Hawkman and Hawkwoman and all that.
Oh, I love that. I forgot about that.
And it was real successful. It was like in the top 5 selling comics. And it was a big, kind of like, it was like producing 3 graphic novels, And they offered me the opportunity to do more, and I was just absolutely, totally resistant to it. They spun it off into a monthly book, and I said, I don't want to do it, because I felt like I told the story. I told the story I wanted to tell, and I wanted to move on. I don't mean to harp too much on the ADHD thing, although it's absolutely integral part of who I am, but I think it's a lot of it's tied in with that. I do it, I want to go. I do it, I want to go.
They called it hyperactive when I was a child.
Yeah, right.
What's wrong with my son? He's hyperactive.
You're right.
Yeah,
fidgety.
So
Goosey.
So you just wanted to change up. You just wanted to do something. I get that.
And it's a novel thing, because I didn't know when I was starting out. I didn't know if I wanted to be an artist. I didn't know if I wanted to be a musician. I didn't know if I wanted to be a writer. And I wanted to write novels. And so at least I got to do 2 of those things by doing special projects for comics. And Conan is the longest I've ever been affiliated with any title. It's been like, it's 8 going on 9 years now. Most of my things last for 2 or 3 years, you know, the longest.
Right.
The longest thing. And it's just, I just do it, I move on. I've got, especially when I was younger, I had far more stories in my head than 100 artists and writers could ever tell. And
I get that.
So I just got it.
My wife, we were talking about you one day, and I don't remember what was brought up. Maybe I was making fun of your hat or something. I don't remember.
Yeah,
no,
probably.
I don't. We were talking though, and she said, "Well, what Tim strikes me as being a lot like you." And I said, "Well, in what way?" He said, "Well, both of you have a short attention span, but you have a terrific attention when you're doing it." And so then the other thing is that I think that's why neither one of you just latch into one thing and keep doing it. Mm-hmm. It's why as a novelist I change, it's like I love when, recently my daughter was visiting with my agent and he was telling her about a certain novelist, and I won't name them because they're a friend of mine, but said that I told this novelist, says, look, you can be an artiste, you can be the writer you want to be, or you can be rich. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll be rich. And so he started writing pretty much the same book over and over. And she said, I've tried to get your dad to do that. He said, it's like talking to a brick wall. I just can't get him to do that. And, and just all this artistic stuff. And I told Casey, I said, no, I really been trying to sell out. But I've not had any luck because as soon as I start writing, I'm me. And I think that's where you and I are similar, is that we bore easy. Yeah. And that once we've told that story, we don't want to ride that story again and again and again. Right. So I think I understand where you're coming from. And now that you've been doing this for years, and of course we've seen your writing chops, especially in the Howard, what I wanted to do is I wanted to ask you 2 things. I'm going to ask you about the Howard adaptations, because you're adapting. You're not trying to, spin off and do that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you, do you feel that now that you're moving more towards writing and that perhaps you're ready for that novel?
Yeah, I'd love to do it.
Well, tell me about it. Well, you have to tell me about the novel. Just tell me. You're not going to get out with you. Yeah.
I don't know. I've got to do it someday. I wrote my first prose story. My first prose fiction story published was Joe was the editor on it's Pulp. Retro Pulp.
Retro Pulp
#2. And I finally got to write this story that had been in my head for years. I'm from West Virginia.
And you were nervous too about it.
Oh yeah.
And I told you, I said, no, you've been doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a different format. I mean, it's totally different animal.
Oh,
but
yeah, it is a different animal.
Stringing words together to create the picture is that you people would see in your head is far different from drawing the picture for you people to see in your head. And there's so many different ways to go about doing that for you. And there's so many ways to put words together to give you different pictures and different versions of that. So it's like doing prose work is absolutely monumentally terrifying to me in that regard, because there's so many different directions that you can take things.
They're all different animals.
Yeah.
They're all related,
yeah.
But they're all different animals. Well, when is that new book going to get started?
No, that might start this summer. I've actually got I've worked myself to the bone the last 2 years, and I've consciously built more time into my schedule to do it.
I just did that too, because I'm doing film stuff now too. So
I ain't getting any younger.
No.
I am
actually. It's about time.
Yeah, it's like hard to. It's hard to be as fast as one was. For one thing, I'm far more careful than I used to be.
Well, you're better. You get better as you go. If you think you know it, then you're not going to get any better. It's like people say, "Oh man, you've been doing this now. You got it down." No, I don't. Yeah. Every time I start, it's like starting over. Yeah. Every time, it's like, have I done this before? And then you do it. But and the last question I was going to ask you is related to new projects and things. Is that I know that you and I have talked about this. We're working with our kids some. And now you're doing that with Ben. Mm-hmm. So tell me about that. What's that like?
Well, it's been fantastic. My son Ben's a really good writer, and he's done a lot of computer game things. That's the business that he actually wants to get into. He also really enjoys comics, and it's not I didn't sit down and say, Ben, do comics. It's just something he saw me doing it every day, and he saw, hey, that's kind of interesting way to kind of get some of these stories out of yourself. And So he sort of started gravitating towards it. And I saw he was interested in it, so I would sort of have him, like, there was a couple Conans that we co-plotted together, and then we did a couple short stories together, and an online thing where I plotted it, but he scripted it, and sort of just because I'd worked as a teacher for 3 years, I sort of had this kind of a sense of how to kind of lead people into being creative, and to sort of getting the lesson of how to do some things and problem solving, et cetera, like, you know. And so he got really good at it. In fact, I think he's better at it than I am. And he's by no means a clone of the old man. We come from completely different. We have completely different interests in storytelling. We have completely different influences. And so I never ever thought we'd be able to work together because we would bump heads.
Oh yeah.
When he was younger, but he's like one of my favorite collaborators. We seldom fight. I mean, sparks fly every once in a while, but it's not like those backyard battles over, you know, clean that stuff up. It's you know,
it's so different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really different. He's just this. He's a really fun, good collaborator, and he forces me to look at things differently. And then also, I make him look at things differently, just by virtue of
different experience.
Yeah, and our different means of sort of our different techniques. He's like far more analytical than I am. I kind of take a story by the seat of the pants. I'll plot it out roughly, and then go for it. And I'll create the characters, and I'll let them tell me what to do with them. You know, they tell you, and so. But he's very. He comes from the opposite spectrum, and it's maddening sometimes. He wants to plan everything out.
That's my son.
To
it's the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know.
What's wrong with those people?
I don't know.
Yeah, my son's like that. I work with him on like screenplays and stuff. Yeah, we really do. We got now. My daughter's different. She's like, "Damn you, Daddy, I'm just like you."
Yeah, that's the same way. Emily and I are the same.
Yeah. Well, you know, working with the kids, I think teaches you new things. Just like you said, it's one of the great surprises and pleasures that I've had is that, you know, because we bumped heads so much when they're growing up. I mean, you know, nothing terrible, but just daddy stuff. And then now they're my favorite people to collaborate with, and among my favorite people to just hang with. You know,
best friends.
Absolutely.
You know.
Best friends that need to do what I tell them.
That's right.
You know, one of the things.
They don't.
Yeah, no, they don't. Of course not. But one of the things that occurred to me, and I'm just going to ask you this briefly, then we're going to have to ask a few questions, is that when your kids, well, Ben, for example, I don't know if Emily's moved into that particular artwork or anything like that, but when they started doing it, did you find yourself I'm my dad, you need to have something to fall back on? I found myself, at least in the back of my mind, thinking, oh my God, this is a hard business. I hate to see them get into it in one way. And my daughter's a singer, bless her heart. She's a songwriter, and she does well at it. Yeah. But she's writing novels, she's an editor, and I'm thinking, my God, this is like a repeat, except it worked for me, but it might not have. And then I'm the same way with my son. He's starting to, you know, write comics and things like that. But there's a part of me that I suddenly linked up and connected with my parents and understood where they were coming from, especially my parents coming out of the Great Depression and everything. You need a job. So do you have yourself worrying about that, especially?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's kind of different. I'm not saying, oh man, give this writing up and
no, me.
And yeah, I didn't figure, but like, you know, go work in, you know, find yourself a good clerk job somewhere, because that's we used to have factories, at least we fall back on.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. But just the nature of the business is. Whenever anybody else, you know, kids or people at conventions or whatever come and say, well, how do I go to the business, get into the business? I'm like,
let's be too.
Used to be, I could steer them in a direction, you know, editors to talk to and stuff. But not that many people are buying anything now, and just about anything.
And I think too, it's really just that you and I have found people that we work with and that we're connected. And you and I don't have to hunt work; they come to us more.
Yeah, usually.
And that's what's changed, and we don't know all the ins and outs anymore. And I'm delighted that my children are interested in it. I never thought they would be.
Right.
And I'm delighted that they are because it's given me so much pleasure. It's been financially rewarding to me. But you still can't help but being scared, a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I was curious about that since we have, we both have the 2 kids, and we've had very parallel lives in many ways.
Really, lots of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's there's just a whole, even the system's different for people finding jobs now.
Yeah.
Ben was submitting applications to companies that were putting up advertisements for writers, and he was doing these, with like great applications, great resumes and stuff. And he found out from some of his friends in the industry, that gaming industry, that everything goes into this great big database. When you do a call for writers, they get hundreds of thousands of submissions.
He found the same thing.
Yeah, and it all goes into a database, and then the people that are sent the call out, they'll type keywords into a computer, and the applications that have those keywords will come up.
Yep.
And so there could be like the next, like the Ernest Hemingway of computer games could be in there somewhere. They'd never know it because there's no personal
They do that with
contact.
journalism and a lot of other things
Yeah.
now too. Keith's got a degree in journalism, and he loves journalism, and now it's a tough
Yeah,
thing.
and it used to be we'd go in and meet editors,
Yeah.
get to know editors,
It's a
and
different
like
world.
that. These days I couldn't take that second idea in. It'd be totally, you know what I mean? Like I couldn't make my own work.
Yeah.
It was starting out.
Well, I'm gonna end this up. I wanted to get a little bit into the personal stuff too, because these things are always, and then I wrote, and then I drew, and I'm interested in the other stuff. And if y'all aren't, I'm sorry. That's just it. But what we're gonna do is gonna open it up for questions now. We got about 10, 12 minutes, I think. Please, sir.
Good question on Jonah Hex. I know you went through that, the legal action. How did that change your writing? The legal action that the Winter Brothers brought against you. How did that eventually change your writing? Because you were putting, artists named like, I think Santana was in Scout. The Winter Brothers were in Jonah Hex. So on and so
I'm to
forth.
blame for the problems, though. I want to make that clear that wasn't
Yeah,
it was
it's kinda
Tim's
musical.
idea for the thing, but it was not his idea for me to do what I did.
I happened to had just gotten done listening to a Johnny Winter CD, like right before Joe called me for one of our monumental plot conferences. And I was like, hey, but anyway.
Has it changed the way you write, though? I mean,
It did for a while, and it really made me mad. It made me angry because
you were paying-
I was
you were
just
paying
speaking for myself.
homage, right?
I got worse. I went the other way.
Yeah.
I just got meaner.
Tell you, that went on for like 9 years.
Was it
I got a
9? I knew- I thought it was
got a
7,
little-
9, yeah.
And it was such a intrinsic part of my style because, like you said, I'd had like tributes to Stevie Ray Vaughan, Santana. I would name characters after my favorite
And
musicians.
graffiti too.
Yeah, I'm why you can't have anything nice. And I messed it up. But see, to me, I didn't think anything of it because Tim probably didn't either at the time we were doing. I think he had one moment of caution there where he said something to me, and I was like, what the hell? But I just thought, this is not them. How would they honestly? I remember we had to go out for. Do you remember we went out for the depositions? And I made
yeah.
I made that
Remember
guy,
that.
made the lawyer over there so mad because he said, "Why do you have Johnny Winter or the Winter Brothers eating this hog's head?" And I said, "Well, first of all, they're the Autumn Brothers, and they're just inspired by it. And if it had been up to me and DC had let me, I had him eating his ass." And so that made him very unhappy.
Yeah. Plus, he would ask these questions, and you were giving yes answers at one point, and you would say, "Well, go to my previous answer," or something like that. You would have, same as my
Repeat,
previous
rinse.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And we were involved in this long First Amendment lawsuit that
We won.
came
by the
out
way.
at our fight. The lawyers, the judges totally kicked them out, but it was like
It made me
they
most upset for
appealed.
Tim though, because I know Tim sold some guitars and some stuff because of the fees.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And I
But
really,
DC was kind of throwing us to the wolves at first.
well, yeah.
And
Me
we had
and
to
DC
defend
really had
ourselves.
problems.
Yeah,
And Tim,
yeah.
they liked Tim better than they did me, because I really just told them, you know what, you guys are a bunch of scumbags because you're supposed to defend us on this because, we had agreed. There's nothing that we did wrong. I could understand if we went out just to, we made fun of everything. Tim in there himself even has a scene where he messes his pants and he drew himself in the art, remember?
Yeah, we made fun
and
of
I thought, I thought
make fun of
everybody. And, and it was just such a broad satire that the idea that they were so offended me, because I thought, really? Because I'd been satirized and you had too. I mean, I just thought it was silly.
Well, their narcissism's pretty offensive because, I'm a Johnny Winter fan, but
Me too.
who the hell else would really know who the hell you're even talking about?
Especially at that time.
You didn't call them the Winters.
Yeah.
So, it's just like, everybody knows.
Well, some fan saw it.
They say these bad things.
Some fan of theirs saw it and went and told them. And we heard too that they were very...
around the same time, Grimjack, John Ostrander had the whole Johnny Melnibone thing.
Yeah.
And stuff, and it's like, this is only helping you out, but what, somebody's going to not like your music because you
Yeah.
you have good guys.
They didn't reprint those things for years after that, but just recently,
like I said, the Winters and
they are reprinting them now.
Yeah.
Tim and I just got word that they're reprinting them.
So that'll be good.
Yeah. Any other
But-
questions?
I don't know if you're going to talk about it tonight, but could you just talk a little bit about adapting Robert E. Howard stories as opposed to right now?
It's really tough because I'm such a Robert E. Howard fan now. I'm to the point of reverence. There are a few people, I probably have 5 people that I am like a super fan of. I just consider them part of it's almost theological, my reverence for them, And Robert E. Howard's one of the main ones. He's my favorite author. The author that was most influential to there's nothing that I've done that hasn't been influenced by Robert E. Howard in some way. And so I am really reverential of the material. By the same token, I'm doing comic books. And when I'm doing particularly adaptations, there are things that when you read Howard's short stories or the Hour of the Dragon novel that read amazingly well, but when you, I'm a storyteller by visual storyteller by trade, and when you start looking at some of the scenes, you realize that wow, if I did a beat by beat interpretation of that, it would actually chew up about 10 pages of the comic, and it would slow the whole thing down to a snail pace. One instance would be in Black Colossus. There's this, during the battle scenes, there's this, Conan's on top of the hill, and there's an enemy army down here, and he has this messenger, one of his generals keeps running up and down the hill, giving reports on the battle. And then runs down the hill, and then he runs up the hill and gives another report on the battle. And he runs down the hill, and then he runs up the hill again to get the report on the battle. And things like that, if you would do them, like I say, beat by beat, it would just, the comic would stall right there. So there are ways to sort of get the gist of their dialogue between each other and condense it all so that you can do it in 3 pages as opposed to 10 or 12. Another one of the limitations of comics is the fact that I got 22 pages in an issue to deal with, and we'd have a set number of issues to be able to tell the story. So you have to keep these time frames in consideration. It's the reason that what's his name took 3 movies to do Lord of the Rings. He could have taken 12 movies, but he obviously had to condense a lot of stuff down. So I call it the masterpiece theater approach. There was they did on Masterpiece Theater. They did a couple of brilliant interpretations of Dickens, and it was Dickens that I'd never understood his work before, and they just brought out certain background characters. Like Fagin took on a bigger role in the story, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. The fact that they've keyed in on certain aspects of the story that I hadn't thought about before. So a lot of that happens when I particularly when I'm adapting Howard. Now, another sort of limitation in comics, or more of a stipulation, I guess, is the fact that you had all these Robert E. Howard short stories. And Dark Horse's overall view of the series is that it is a 1,000 pages long novel, and they want it all linked together. So in order to do that, you would have to construct, 4 or 6 page issues where you would tell the in-between stories, things that happen between the actual Howard stories. So what I would do in that case, Howard was really brilliant about giving a lot of Conan backstory within a sentence here, a paragraph there. Little stuff for you to pick up and say, oh, that's interesting. There's this the Cushite jailer is referring to something that Conan did to his family back when Conan was a Corsair. So you say, that's, I think I'll draw on that. You can do things like that. That other things you run into with Howard is, say, for instance, the Rogues in the House story. Conan's fight, they're watching this big ape on this, it's like the equivalent of a wizard's television screen. And all at once, these rebels come rushing into the room as they're watching, and you're like, where the heck did these guys come from? And the wizard knows them, and he's referring to them, but there wasn't any mention of them previously in the story. Actually, personally, I think it's a great story flaw. But anyway, I used, in some of the issues that I did, I introduced those rebel characters so that they weren't just coming in from left field. So in one of the pre-stories, it was of my creation. I introduced them so that they would make sense in Rogues in the House and give them a little background. So that kind of stuff was fun to do. It was real fun because you're doing Howard but not doing Howard.
Go ahead. I was just
going to say, would you have done your hour? Still ongoing. We just got the first issue, but would you have done your Hour of the Dragon adaptation any different if it wasn't monthly? Periodic comic, as opposed to just one graphic novel? Would you have done it differently?
The thing that I would have done it differently if I had started out with it, because a lot of things that happen in Hour of the Dragon are things that Howard, when he was putting the novel together, he pulled different instances. It isn't exact duplications of things that he'd done in other stories, but it was concepts, and he pulled them in from various short stories. My problem is I've already done a lot of those short stories. So for the reader at large and the comic book audience, and also the fact that we're doing the thousands of pages long Conan novel adaptation, my readers have seen me do, I'm using quotes here, my readers have seen me do these things before. So it kind of becomes like when I was reading Marvel Conan's, we would call it the castle falls down sequence. There were these in every issue of Savage Sword. There, after like the 3rd year, it ended with Conan riding down the hill, and behind him the wizard's palace is falling in. It was like almost every issue it seemed like. I'm sure I'm exaggerating, but so I don't want to fall into that trap. So there are a lot of things that I'm doing, little adjustments I'm making for the comic audience, just so that it won't seem like, oh, they've run out of steam here.
done it before.
Yeah.
Well, is this go to 2:30 or is it go to? Okay, it's almost over with. The only thing I was going to say too is that the reason we talked about stuff besides Robert E. Howard is that Tim's the guest, and I wanted people to know some background as to what leads up to why he's doing this. So it wasn't that we were trying to avoid it. We were just when I asked you what you wanted, and that's we gave you. Because I think Tim's bigger than Conan just itself. I mean, he's done more than that. Conan's pretty good size, though. But anyway, it's supposed to be something about what Tim's done. So what we got is one more question. And if you got time for one more, a very quick question, Tim can answer it. There's one.
Beyond the Black River.
Oh, yeah. My favorite Conan story, Beyond the Black River. Mark's too, I think. Obviously, yours.
It's a Western.
I would die, and I would kick my perfect situation would be kicking Tomas. I love him dearly, but I would have to kick him out of the artist seat for
I think in that case you should.
Because I see that story, and I would be able to dress Conan like I see him in my head.